Hello and welcome to the MyHeritage webinar series. I'm Jeff Rasmussen, your host, broadcasting to you live from webinar headquarters in Middleton, Idaho. Today we have Mike Mansfield with us, who is live in Lehi, Utah, for his class, Unlocking English and Welsh Civil Registration Records. So thanks to Mike, and thanks to all of you for registering for today's live webinar, wherever and whenever you are. Glad to have you with us. And now I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Mike Mansfield. Mike works for MyHeritage.com as the Director of Content Operations. Previously, Mike has worked for Ancestry.com and Family Search, and has been active in the genealogy and family history domain for the last 20 years. Mike has presented at numerous genealogical conferences and symposia in the United States, England, Scandinavia, and Australia. He holds a bachelor's degree in computer science from BYU and a Master of Science in Library and Information Science from Syracuse University. Please put together your virtual hands and let's give Mike Mansfield a nice warm webinar welcome. Mike, how are you, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jeff. It's great to be here. I was hoping I might have been the 1001 webinar, but I understand.
Since then we've been busy. I think today's number 1007, 1008, something like that now. But still, Mike, that you're not any less important, and we love you, and we love your topic today. So glad to have you, and the time's all yours, Mike.
Great, and I think my slide is showing now.
It is. It looks good.
Awesome. Well, I've been excited about this session for some time now. Often when I'm asked to speak on content, I get this really broad topic, like talk about all the census records around the world, or all the passenger records, for the U.S. and Canada. And it's really hard sometimes to squeeze in the information I think is relevant into a short session like we have here. So this is a really good chance to focus on a very specific yet very important record type for those of us that have English and Welsh family members. So today we're talking about English and Welsh civil registration records. The outline for today, we'll do some brief history of civil registration in England and Wales. We'll then discuss some of the known caveats and issues with these records. And we'll look at the records and what they contain and how they can help us in our family history work and genealogy pursuits. And then we'll examine the process of using the indexes to these civil registration records, which then in turn allow us to order these records where we actually get the real gold that we're searching for. All right, so a brief history, and the main date here is 1837. So I think this was actually the year that, Queen Victoria was crowned monarch. And it's an important day as well in genealogy, this year 1837. So prior to 1837, there was no national system of civil registration in England and Wales. Baptisms or christenings performed by the Church of England, marriages and burials were recorded primarily in parish registers maintained by the Church of England and their ministers and clergy. With the increase in nonconformity, so when I'm talking about nonconformist records and nonconformity, I'm just referring to this general notion of persons in England and Wales who were not adherents of the Church of England faith. So these might be Quakers or other types of Protestant denominations, Jewish groups, those types of individuals. So with the increase in nonconformity and the gradual relaxation of laws against Catholics and these other nonconformist groups from the late 17th century, more and more of these vital events were going unrecorded. There really wasn't a mechanism for persons not in the Church of England to easily record their births, marriages, and deaths. The increasingly poor state of English parish registration also led to numerous attempts to reform that system. We see several attempts in Parliament in the 1700s and early 1800s to try to revamp and update the system. The Marriage Act of 1753 is a good example. This attempted to prevent, for example, these marriages that were known as clandestine marriages by imposing a standard form of entry for marriages, which had to be signed by both parties and then also by some witnesses who could be sort of accountable for what they had witnessed. And with the exception provided only to Jews and Quakers, however, legal marriages at that time had to be carried out according to the rites of the Church of England. So some Jewish synagogues and some Quaker groups were given special status, but other groups, even within the Jewish and Quaker communities, were more traditionally nonconformists and still had great difficulty. The Procurial Registers Act of 1812 established that all events had to be recorded on standardized entries, but again in these parish records maintained by the Church of England. The same act also declared that church registers of nonconformists were not admissible in court as evidence of vital events such as births, marriages, and deaths. And only those maintained by the Church of England could be presented in court. So you could imagine this caused significant hardships for those in the nonconformist community as perhaps you're trying to prove lineage for, say, some inheritance of land or other type of legal proceeding that would need to establish your say, familiar and inheritance chain, so to speak. So a number of reform proposals were presented to Parliament to establish a centralized registration system for vital events, even up into the 1820s, but none came to fruition. This problem, though, certainly didn't go away, and by 1833, the government had formed what they called a select committee on parochial registration to review the then current model of using almost exclusively these Church of England maintained parish registers and to see how the system could either be reformed or revamped in some way. So this committee, after studying the concerns and issues with the current system, made proposals that were eventually incorporated into this 1836 Bill for Registering Births, Deaths, and Marriages in England, and at the Wales is also covered under this notion of England at the time. So in 1837, the answer was the establishment of this centralized civil registration system. It took effect on July 1st, 1837. So exactly halfway through the calendar year, they were ready to roll out this new system. The General Registrar Office, or what's commonly called as the GRO, was set up in London, and the Office of Registrar General was established within the government. There's sort of a long history that I won't go into about how this General Registrar Office has been moved between different ministries there in the government. Just most importantly, here near the more modern day, in 2008, the GRO became a subsidiary of the Identity and Passport Service, or what was called IPS. And then more recently, in 2013, IPS was renamed HM Passport Office, or I believe it's Her Majesty's Passport Office. So later in the session today, when I'm showing you how we'll access some of these records, or many of these records, will be going to this HM Passport Office site. So it's kind of weird to think that you're going to this passport office for your vital records request, but that's how the government is currently organized there. So leading up to this change on July 1st, 1837, we can find a number of newspaper articles. Here's two examples, one from the Kendal Mercury and another one from the Yorkshire Gazette. These are, all, I think, identical in text, so some sort of official announcement that they were probably reprinting on behalf of the government. Here's another example that was published on July 7th, so the newspaper was just a few days behind maybe where they might have wanted to have been, but this is the Norfolk Chronicle. Here on page 1, so right below the main title of the newspaper up above, which I don't show, but just some information here which might be helpful to us. It starts, all births and deaths which occur after June 1837 may be registered by the registrar of the district within which they occur, without any payment being required from the persons applying to have them register, provided that in the case of a birth, it is registered within 6 weeks after the day of the birth. And it goes on and talks about how a birth could still be registered, but there was sort of a penalty fine of 7 shillings and 6 pence, and then it couldn't be registered at all after 6 months without some very special procedures. And then it talks about how death events could be registered really at any time after the death, but they hoped it could be done as soon as possible. And what's interesting is you read these initial announcements that were published, we don't see anything about registering marriages. And I'll talk more about this in just a moment, but this new system, the ministers, primarily in the Church of England, were still acting in many ways as official government appointed registrars. So the ministers under this new law still had a very important role to play in making sure that marriages were registered. And so my guess is that the government didn't see it necessary to announce that more complicated process that the ministers would be continuing to maintain and manage. But that does cause some confusion that you'll see, where a couple decades after 1837, one of the complaints were that a father and a mother of a new infant would take their infant for christening at the church, and they might have been under the impression that that christening event turned into an automatic civil registration event, which it did not, unlike the marriage event, that they would have sort of automatically been registered with their marriage there at the Anglican Church. So here's an example of one of the gold nuggets, so to speak. This is what we're really looking for in these civil vital records. This is an example of a birth record, and one nice thing about these records when you get these from the GRO is they come color-coded. So this red sort of background color is a standard form for a birth register. And what you see there in the middle with sort of the speckled background, that's the actual historical portion of this registered document that contains the information that we're looking for. And I'll show in just a moment what are some of the fields that we get with this. So because this particular example from my own family comes from the county of Monmouth, sometimes this is in England, sometimes this is in Wales. There's history there that I won't go into right now, but we're seeing these labels in English and Welsh. So here's sort of a guide to what these birth certificates contain. I've labeled 1 through 8 there in the red dots above that main section. And you'll see on the left, we start with the date and place of birth. One interesting note there is the time of birth might indicate that the birth was actually of a twin or a triplet, some sort of multiple birth. They may be trying to indicate which of those twins, for example, might have been the eldest, an important notion in some heredity situations. In field 2, we get the forenames or what we'll often call given names as well of the child. The surname usually isn't directly listed here in field 2, and it's inferred that the surname of the child will be that of the father that is listed. So the father is listed in field 4 or bubble 3. We also get the gender there in the column 3 that I didn't label, but in field 3 we get the father's name. The absence of a name of a father might indicate that the father wasn't present or was not legally married to the mother. This might be a case of a bastard child, so to say. Number 4, we get the name and maiden name of the mother, and that's very helpful that we get the maiden name, very important. And another important note there is from the September of 1911, the mother's maiden name is included in the index. Prior to that, it might be more rare to see. The occupation of the father is also very helpful. Sometimes we know something about the father's line of work, and that can help us distinguish or disambiguate possible different records for persons that might have similar names. We get a signature and description and resident of the informant. Sometimes the signature is just the X, an indication that the person wasn't able to necessarily sign their name. So sort of the mark of so-and-so. The informant could be a lot of different people. It could be the mother, it could be the father, it could be a grandparent. It's very hard to tell. And then in the 7th field, we get the date registered. And then finally in 8, names entered after registration, the note there is important, used to record any names given to the child, for example, at baptism up to 12 months after initial registration. In my experience, these are very rare to see where maybe the family has decided to provide an additional given name to the infant, and hopefully that would have been recorded. Again, I've rarely seen those. Here's an example of a marriage record, and these are coded in this green background, and you see there in that middle section sort of this photoshopped, cut and pasted portion of this original record into this green background document. This is, again, one of my family members here in Monmouthshire. His name is William Griffiths, and he's marrying this woman named Elizabeth Lewis Alexander. Let me go here to show what more of the fields are. So here in bubble 1, we get the date of marriage. In bubble 2, we get the names and surnames of both the bride and the groom, and we're given their respective ages in bubble 3. And in 4, we get the condition as to marriage. This is often very important when you're looking at whether someone's maybe having a second marriage. So for an initial marriage of a man, it should say bachelor. An initial marriage of a woman, it should say spinster. But sometimes you'll see a widower or widow, and that's a good indication, a perfect indication that that person had been married previously. We sometimes get, or we often get information about the man's profession. Less often we'll see information about the woman's profession or occupation, but it doesn't mean that she wasn't employed in some sort of way. And then information about both of their residences and the name of the profession of the father of both the bride and the groom. That can also be very helpful to allow us to disambiguate possible situations where we have similarly named persons being married. And then the death certificates are printed on this black sort of background document. Again, that middle section that you see there is sort of the historical record that we're looking at. This is again for one of my family members named John Manfield. Let's look at another example of what we get on these death certificates or death registration records. We get when and where they died, the surname, name and surname. We get the gender, and then in bubble 4, the age. Sometimes you'll see age expressed both in years. Sometimes you'll see it for children maybe in months or weeks or even days. It just kind of depends. And then the occupation of the deceased. The cause of death started to be recorded, I think, by about 1848, if I remember. It was required that the cause of death be certified by some sort of attending physician, if possible. And then we get the signature, description, and resident of the informant. For death records, this is very helpful to help us understand if we have the right record. Hopefully we're going to see a name here of someone that we recognize, maybe a spouse, maybe a child. Some sort of relationship helps us tremendously. And then we get the place, or excuse me, when it's registered. All right, so in 1837, England was divided into 618 registration districts. And by 1815, they had added just a few more to get to 623. Each registration district was under the supervision of what was called a superintendent registrar. And it's important to make a notion between this terminology of superintendent registrar, and later we'll talk about sub-registration districts. A superintendent registrar was the person in charge of the entire registration district, and they sometimes would subdivide these registration districts further. So a registration district is essentially a collection of parishes. So the parish, both ecclesiastical and then useful civil purposes, are in a very important construct in English genealogy research. And what had happened here in 1837 is just a few years prior, in 1834, the government had passed an important set of laws called the Poor Law Amendment Act, which set up a number of poor law unions. You may have heard of these if you've done research in England and Wales before. And these unions were collections of parishes. So what they adopted in 1837 was to more or less use the exact same poor law union boundaries that they had established just a few years prior in 1834. So basically, when we talk about a registration district, it's essentially a collection of parishes. And I'll show you how we can work with parishes in just a moment. And like I mentioned, registration districts were often further subdivided into sub-districts. There could be 2 or sometimes more sub-districts within a registration district. In my experience working with these records, I've generally not had to concern myself with the sub-districts when I'm using the indexes and other materials I'll show you in just a moment. So there's 3 resources I'll demonstrate. I'll first show you here in the deck, and then I'll show you on a live website. There's a really nice map here that I like on this Wikipedia article under registration district, and the URL is there, and I'll show you that in just a moment. Another really fabulous resource is this project that Family Search did a number of years ago called the England Jurisdictions 1851 Project. And I'll show you how this works. It's also quite helpful. And the third resource that I'll mention as we use these records is this great website called UKBMD. So with that, let me jump over to a browser. And the first thing I want to show you is this really nice map at Wikipedia. And I'm just trying to find my mouse. There it is. So if you go to this Wikipedia article, there's this really great map here. And if you click on it, you get this sort of bigger view. But whenever you see this magnifying glass at Wikipedia, it's an indication that you can download an even bigger or higher resolution version. And when I click on that again, I'm brought to just an incredibly detailed map. And some of the examples I'll be showing you today, I'll be working with some of the records from my family here in southwest Surrey, specifically the registration district of Hambledon, if I'm saying it correct. And then another example is from my family is here in Monmouthshire in the registration district of Abergavenny, if I'm saying it right. So a nice map. I'd refer you to probably download this or keep it in your notes. Sometimes, like if I'm working in Surrey here, it's definitely helpful to have quick sort of understanding of what these other registration districts are in and around the neighborhood where you're working. Let's next look at this resource that I mentioned from Family Search. So in southwest Surrey, I have a parish called Dunsfold where much of my Mansfield, my direct surname line, comes from. Let's go ahead and search on, my mouse is, there we go. Let's go ahead and search on Dunsfold. So this is a parish, and I get a record for Dunsfold, and I can see it here on the map, here in the very far southern western corner of Surrey. And if I click here on the parish link, I'm brought to a kind of a zoomed in view of this parish, and I get this pop-up window. By default here, it's showing me some information about the parish registers, that's the PR, and the bishop's transcripts. For this particular topic, we're interested in the civil registration district that's under jurisdiction. So this is one way I know some information about my family's parishes, and I can look up which civil registration district they're in. So this parish of Dunsfold is one of, I don't know, about a dozen or so different parishes that are that comprise the civil registration district called Hambledon. And I can click on this link to see that list. It's maybe a little bit more than a dozen. Alfold Surrey, Alfold Sussex, many of these other parishes I instantly recognize from my other family history work. So this is a really nice tool to see how parishes map to registration districts. Let me next come up to, I apologize, my mouse is just not showing well. This next one I want to show you is this UKBMD site. And when you come here to ukbmd.org.uk/reg, you get this really great link here, this list of districts. And so, for example, I can click on H and we'll find the same Hambledon district that I've mentioned before, and I can get a lot of information about the civil parishes and just incredibly detailed information about when these parishes were maybe transferred in and out of the civil registration district, where they were transferred to, over here even how many people were affected by these changes. So that's another very helpful service that I use, is this site here at UKBMD. Jumping back into the deck, when I talk about this next section, I'm reminded about this section in the movie or the film Aladdin, where Aladdin's found the lamp and he's asking the genie about what some of the conditions or rules are of using this magic lamp. And we certainly have some caveats and provisos, this word that the genie uses in that movie that I've always enjoyed about these records. So in the first few decades of this system, established again in 1837, it was up to each local registrar to find out what births and deaths had taken place. Unfortunately, it's been estimated that in some parts of England, up to maybe 15% of births were not registered between 1837 and 1875. There was still, it seems like, quite a bit of confusion in the general populace about this role that the clergy were playing in officially registering marriages, but not officially registering births. And they had a different role with deaths, where in a death, obviously most often you're taking the remains of your family member to the parish church to be buried, and the clergy were again somewhat involved in that process. I'll speak about that in just a moment. A woman may not have registered the birth of an illegitimate child because of the shame connected with the event at the time. And then some parents did not register a birth because they believed, this is what I was talking about, that if a child was baptized there in the Church of England, that their birth did not need to be separately registered, because it would have, they thought incorrectly, been automatically registered. So in 1875, additional legislation was passed which cleared up the requirements as the government continued to push for as comprehensive registration as they could get. Looking specifically at some other caveats with births, until 1926, there were no registrations of stillborn children. So sometimes people have difference of opinions about the work we do as genealogists with stillborns. The one case that I found most interesting is if you're trying to build a family and get all the children of a particular couple, knowing when a stillbirth occurred can help you explain why there's maybe a gap between children that you might be trying to understand. For illegitimate children, the original 1836 legislation provided that, quote, "It shall not be necessary to register the name of any father of a bastard child," so even specifically sort of prohibiting that the father would be recorded in those situations. However, this started to change in 1850. New instructions were provided that no putative, this is a fancy word for presumed or assumed father, is allowed to sign any entry in the character of father. By 1875, the law was changed again to allow the father of an illegitimate child to record his name if he attended the registrar office with the mother. And then by 1953, a father could also be recorded on the birth certificate if not married to the mother, and he didn't need to be physically present to sign the register. Some caveats about marriages. So for marriages, Church of England clergy acted as the local registrar still. This was one of, maybe in my opinion, weaknesses of this new scheme. It certainly seemed to cause some confusion. So two identical registers of marriages were kept by these Church of England ministers, and when they were complete at the end of a 3-month quarter, so January, February, March, so the end of March, they would finalize this registrar and send it to the superintendent, and then they do the same thing in June, and then July, September, the end of September, and then the end of December. The Marriage Act of 1836 permitted marriages by license to also take place in approved churches, chapels, and nonconformist meeting houses. So this is how a nonconformist couple would get married, is they would go and apply for a marriage license. It's a little unfortunate because there was a additional cost associated with getting a license this way, but still quite onerous, as these nonconformist marriages, even though they had gotten these marriage licenses, it still had to be witnessed by a local registration office for it to be a legally, what the government considered a legal marriage. This legislation was not repealed until 1898, after which nonconformist ministers essentially had the same rights and privileges as the clergy of the Church of England, where they could essentially record the marriages occurring in their denominations in a more official capacity. And then finally, a local registrar could perform marriages at a registration office. All right, deaths were to be registered by someone who had been present at the death or during the final illness. If that wasn't possible, the death could be registered by the owner of the building where the person deceased, or if that deceased person was him or herself the owner, by some other occupant in the building. And there were some more complicated situations for example, the police might have found a body in the village or town, or there was a coroner's inquest. So regardless, the death was supposed to have been registered within 8 days. To further ensure that deaths had been registered as these laws progressed, clergymen were expected to ask for and review the death certificate, performing a funeral or burial service to ensure that the death had been properly registered. However, these clergy were given some leeway where they still could conduct a burial, provided that they sort of then remembered or took the responsibility, which we hope they did well, to then notify the registrar themselves of that death. A few other caveats and provisos, and then we'll move on to some practical examples. From 1845, the cause of death had to be certified by a doctor. I think I mentioned that a little bit earlier. And once a death had been registered, the registrar would normally issue a certificate for burial or cremation. I've never actually seen any evidence, although I haven't looked too hard, that these certificates for burial or cremation have survived in any form. These appear to have been some sort of transient document that were produced and not retained. However, I would very much like to be wrong on that. That'd be a very nice additional backup document for us. So the Births and Deaths Act of 1874 tried to ensure all deaths were registered by placing a duty, so to speak, on persons who were supposed to register the death. However, no specific penalty was imposed. So a duty without penalty, we sometimes know how those go. So how do we access these records? And we'll talk about the indexes that we use, or the GRO indexes. So as I mentioned, every 3 months, the sub-registrars, or the clergymen in the case of marriages, were to send a copy of their births, marriages, and deaths registered in their local offices to the Registrar General in London. These copies received by the Registrar General were bound into volumes, and then alphabetical indexes were prepared on a quarterly basis. And from their inception, these indexes give the surname, the given names, registration district, volume, and page number on which the actual registered record may be found. And I'll show you several examples of these in just a moment. These indexes are the primary tool we use to order the birth, marriage, and death certificates. So it's a two-step process I'm going to describe. The first step is we search these indexes. I'll be using the indexes we have on MyHeritage and pointing out some of the unique things that we did to the publications. But primarily what we're going to look for when we find a person of interest is we're going to want to record the year, the quarter in which the event occurred, the surname, the given name, the registration district, the volume, and the page number. And then step 2, which I'll also demonstrate, is we then go to this online ordering service at this HMS passport service and request the actual record by supplying the information above that we had learned from the index. So with that, let's jump over to a browser. And we're going to go to this link here. So here I'm on the England and Wales Death Index at MyHeritage. Let me briefly illustrate how I could find this on MyHeritage if I just come to MyHeritage. So one way I can find these is I can come to the Research tab. I can use our map widget, and I can go, to example, for England. And here is the England and Wales Birth Index. So this is the index of births. Below it is the death index and the marriage index. That's one way I can find it. Another way that sometimes I'll use is just to go to the collection catalog, again under the Research tab, and I'll just search for England and Wales even, and that will probably bring them fairly high up in the rank, which it does. I apologize, I keep having this problem with my mouse. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong. So that's how we can find these. So we have the index of births, marriages, and deaths. One thing I would always recommend that you do is when you come to a collection like this is click on this little down arrow, which will show you additional information that we try really hard to write here that is going to give you additional details. For example, in this paragraph here, it says that from September 1911, the birth index also includes the mother's maiden name. That's very helpful to know as we use these records. Let me come back up here to one of my examples I wanted to show you. So here we're going to search for John Miller, sort of a very probably common name in 1840. And what I'm less interested in showing you here is a specific example more generally. So sometimes these indexes, let's click on this first one, are a handwritten ledger. I can zoom in. So in this case, you see that we have the surname. Again, this is a death index of the deceased person on the left, the name of the given name or four names, and then the superintendent registrar's district. So these are not sub-districts. These are the primary registration districts. And then the volume number, often these are written in Roman numerals on these handwritten ledgers, and then the page number. The good, or at least my experience, is these registers were often written, and it looks like by some sort of professional clerk, and their handwriting is usually somewhat decent and can be deciphered without too much difficulty. So now let's look at a later example. Let's actually go, I don't know, say 1910. I'm just sort of going to search for someone named Miller. So another form that you'll see these indexes are in these printed typescript forms. So what's really going on here is we have three columns. You see the two lines there in the middle. We have three entire columns of records. So here at the top, it starts with this Elizabeth Ann Miles, and it goes down, and then the surnames change. These long dashes under the surname are just an indication of a ditto. So here we have Ada Miller, so a whole bunch of Millers, M-I-L-L-E-R, and then they continue on the second column with this Charles William Miller. And then the third column, we have more Millers, and then the last surnames here on this page appear to be Mills, with this Elizabeth Mills here at the very end. So you'll see a mix of handwritten registers from some of the earlier time periods and then typed registers. Sometimes there's two columns and sometimes there's three columns like this. But basically, almost regardless of how old these registers or these indexes are or new, you're going to see the same general five fields. We need the name, the surname, the given name, the district name, the volume number, and the page number. By 1910, in the death, for example, you're also seeing the age of the person when they died. This can also be very helpful if we're trying to disambiguate persons for whom we want to study more specifically. And then one other example I wanted to show is from, let me edit the search, is from a very recent death, let's say 1998. And this is something that's talked about in the description. By 1984, the government had stopped producing these indexes in a paper format, and they were distributing them exclusively as computer files. So there are no paper indexes anywhere on the planet for these records after 1985. So if you see just sort of a placeholder icon here in MyHeritage, that's an indication that there is no index paper page per se, but we still have the index, and we can see the registration district right here, the Sudbury in Suffolk County, along with the registration number and entry number, which we would use to order. So let me show you an example from my family. So here's one of my direct surname relatives, this John Mansfield. For many, many years, I've never known a death date for this individual. We believe he will have a very good information about where he was born, when he was married, who he married, and I believe he was he died in about 1852. So here in MyHeritage, I'm going to search the England-Wales Death Index. I'm going to put 1852 plus or minus 2 years. I'm going to say I want him to definitely have died in Surrey. That's my best theory right now. And I'm going to do John and then the spelling Mansfield. And if I hit search, I get a search result with no results. There is no one named John Mansfield who died in Surrey in 1852. And what's happened is my family has long been fixated on our sort of spelling of our surname. And so I had searched for Mansfield with an S here. Let me zoom in a little bit. But if I take off the S and search for one of the most common, if not the very most common variants of my family's name back in England, I get this name Manfield without the S. And if I search for this, sure enough, look, I get one record, a John Manfield, dying in about the year that I expect in this registration district called Hambledon, which is exactly the district that I had shown you earlier that many of these parishes that my family is from. So to order this record, what I would do is I would come in here to his record, and I can see the volume and page number, and the registration district is here. I often like to come to the image though and just double check that the index is spot on, because I'm going to have to pay some money that I'll show you in just a moment to the passport service to actually get this record. So I want to make sure I've got the information recorded exactly as they have it in the index. So I'm going to search for Manfield without an S. I come down to the bottom, I see a Mander, so they're still up here at the top. So here's Manfield at the top of the right column. And the third one down, I see a John Manfield from Hambledon, volume 4, page 142. It's also interesting to note that another person named Mark Manfield died in the same registration district and was recorded just on the next page. My theory is that this is likely one of John's sons, this Mark Manfield. So once I've recorded this information about this record, I'm ready now to go and order the certificate. So before I do that, I just briefly want to show you a few other slides. So again, here's the screenshot of where we just were. So here's the quarter of this index record that we found. Here's the year, and here's the surname. Here's the given name, the registration district, the volume, and the page number. Those are the pieces of information that I'm going to need, along with the knowledge that I'm looking for a death here when I go to register the certificate. So some people may say, hey, you just kind of waved your hands at this magic surname variant that you pulled out of thin air, this variant of my name without the S in it, this Manfield. And so I'm just going to give you a few quick recommendations on how to find some other variants for your own family in England and Wales. It's a very important part of doing good research is also looking for these other spellings of your surname that you may not be immediately familiar with. So for example, in the 1841 census of England and Wales, I was able to find John and his wife Sarah and their children. In fact, down here at the bottom, there's this child named Mark, who is the person I assume is maybe the decedent that I showed you on that same page just a few minutes ago. So I have some evidence here that he's being recorded, at least by the census taker, as this form Manfield. Another very important record that I have is the marriage record of this man. So I knew that he had married this woman named Sarah Pinkett, but I had missed this marriage record probably many times as I had looked through these, because I was fixated on the surname up here at the top, and I failed to read the signature of the witness down here. So here he is writing his name Manfeld, M-A-N-F-E-L-D. I'm a bit lucky here that he's able to actually sign his name instead of indicating with a mark. And then the priest or the minister at the top wrote his name as M-A-N-V-E-L. So just here in these two records, I have a great deal of evidence of some phonetic changes going on. So one of my first recommendations is definitely try to use some of the phonetic indexes we have on MyHeritage. Let me show an example. I think I have one lined up here. So here I'm searching the death index for Amos Wiggins. I'm using the advanced search mode. So if I come to the advanced search, I get this additional drop down where I can, by default, it's going to have some phonetic algorithms already selected. And if I do a search here, in addition to getting hits on the surname Wiggins, I'm also going to get hits on surnames that sound very phonetically similar, such as Wickens. And Wickens spelled with an I, spelled with an E, all different forms of different phonetic versions of that name. So that's one way to find surname variants, use some of the phonetic indexes we have on MyHeritage. I think we do a really good job with our phonetic indexing. I could probably spend a whole session just on that. Try to find the person or family first in other records such as censuses, like I showed you how I was able to find this John Manfield or Manvel or Manfeld, however you want to consider his last name, in the 1841 census. And then it's super important to build up a sort of a working set of these surnames for these families that we're working on. Another way you can find these types of surname variants are to try to find some reference books, such as this one I'm showing here, the Oxford Dictionary of Family Names. Over on the right in blue, I'm showing you that they give you just a few variants. Imagine a robust list here. There would probably be quite a few. Another reference work is this Dictionary of American Family Names. Had I taken my own advice and looked at this a long time ago, I would have seen that this book could have led me to this notion that Manville is a known alteration or variant of Mansfield. So for my surname Mansfield, at the bottom here you'll see that I've got a number of columns. These are some of the surname variants that I've kind of trained myself to look for. The most common one there being the one without the S, and then this new set under Manville, these other new forms. And then again, this particular gentleman, this John Manfield, married a Sarah Pinkett, so I need to start to track additional surnames and variants for other family members. All right, so now let's go to HM Passport Office to see how we actually order these certificates. So the first thing you're gonna see this page on the right when you go there, and I've zoomed in on the register or login. And when you click on register as an individual, you're gonna be taken to a standard, fill in the form, give them information about your name and your address. They're going to be mailing things to you, so that's why they're asking for your mailing address here. So after your registration is done, then you'll be able to come back here and you'll be able to log in with your email address and password, which I have done here, and I'm going to flip back to the website and show you some examples on live. So here I'm logged in with my account here at the Passport Office, and here is where I can place an order for one of these certificates. So in this case, let's use this example of a death that I showed you for my ancestor John Manfield. I really don't know why my mouse is doing that. Apologize. So I'm going to select England and Wales, and then I'm going to select a death, and it's going to pop down another box where I'll put in the year. If you remember what I had saved before, the year was 1850. And in this case, I know the GRO index reference, right? This is the district name, the page number, and the volume. So I'm going to check that. And so I'm brought to this next page where I put in information that I know from the index. This is going to help the workers here at the Passport Office find the exact record that I want. And the quarter of this death was January, February, March, or the first quarter. The district name was Hambledon. I've already typed these, as you can see. Volume 4, page 142. And then we get the delivery options and prices. So the default is standard delivery. It costs £11, and they'll send you one of those paper certificates like I showed you, and it'll arrive in a couple weeks if you live here in the States. If you're really in an urgent hurry, you can do priority shipping, and they would get to you here in the United States as early as 4 days, assuming that you've ordered before 4 p.m. There in England. Some other options, you can also, for a little less money, for £7, you can get a PDF version only, and I'll show you what that looks like. So it's not a paper document. They don't email, they don't mail you anything. Rather, you come back to the website here and you access your PDFs from the site, and I'll show you that in just a moment. Great, so here's the information from the record that we created. So back here, I can now put in, maybe I put in a reminder for myself, so this is the death of John Manfield. This is just something for me. I can't really put much here. So, I can put some information and I'll hit submit. And then this is where it's going to give me some other information about confirming my order, and eventually I'll be taken to a page where I can pay with a credit card. So here's an example of what one of the PDFs look like, and I apologize, they're not blue colored like this. So underneath, this is a PDF that I downloaded of the death that I had just shown you. So here's this gentleman, John Manfield. I see a death date, the 6th of March, 1850. I see that he's a gardener. Cause of death is old age, and there was no medical attendance at the time. And some information about who the informant was. I was a little disappointed when I got this because I don't recognize the name of this Mary Elliott. I don't know who this person is, but it's interesting to know that this ancestor of mine died in this place called Shalford. This is one of the parishes that I'm a little bit familiar with there in Surrey. And I get the data was registered. So this gives me some other information that I could go maybe look at the church parish records in Shalford for 1850 to see if I can corroborate this a little bit better. One of my theories is maybe this Mary Elliott is one of his daughters who's married a man named Elliott. I'm unsure who this informant is. So there's still a chance that I don't have the right person. The other thing that's concerning here is his age at 77 years is a little bit older than I would have expected from what I thought I had about his birth. So maybe there's an issue that the age is just wrong, and that this Mary Elliott wasn't very well acquainted with this John Manfield and reported an incorrect age. I'm not sure yet. So what's happening with these PDF files is they're really doing some Photoshop. So at the top of this page, if we were to go break into the passport office and get the actual real image, at the top of the image we would see this top part, and then somewhere down below we would see this row. And really what they're doing is they're Photoshopping these, so to speak, together. And you can see on that boundary there that they don't really line up perfectly in the original that I was able to download. But that's really what's happening, is they're taking that original strip of the record from the register and putting it together to give you this final PDF form. So this is exactly what I got when I downloaded this PDF, this one single image. And just to show you, this portion here matches with the paper version that I also ordered. So if I go through the process and instead of selecting PDF, I select to have this shipped to me, I'll get something like an envelope like this, and inside of it there's another envelope, and inside that envelope there's two documents. The one on the left is the original, or the certificate that I ordered. This is a marriage for one of my family members. And on the right is a document that just kind of lists some of the information that I had provided to the service, and some other information about the order itself. So the paper version that I received in the mail from the passport office has this section here, which sure enough, if I show these to you, they match identically. You can see how the PDF version of the record in that middle strip is just a same copy of that original image that they have, that they put on the certificate. So here's another example using the same process of another one of my family members named William. His father was Poling, this John Poling. Unfortunately, we don't believe that Jane Poling here, this Jane formerly Fluck, and this John Poling were ever married. This was a case of a illegitimate birth in my mother's family, where William later takes the name of the man Samuel Poling, who this, Samuel Griffiths, who this Jane Fluck later marries. So sometimes you have to kind of look hard at the family about what's going on. So to find this record, I would come to the website, and instead of looking for a William Griffiths, I would search instead for a William Poling here in Abergavenny, Monmouthshire. And if I search here, I get a nice record here of William. The birth year looks about exactly what I expected. Again, same type of thing as you've seen in the death index that I showed earlier, but this is with a birth, where I get the registration district, the volume, and the page number. And then zooming in here, I'm going to look for the surname polling. And it just so happens in this case, they're in the very upper leftmost corner where I see William polling. The district is Abergavenny, if I'm saying it right, volume 11, page 54. And this was the second quarter, or the quarter ending in June 1868. And that was the information I was able to use to order this birth certificate, right? This is the goal. This is as good as it gets in English research. We're getting a primary source document here about this person's birth with information about the mother and perhaps the father, just maybe the fact that the mother and father hadn't been married. So similarly, I can follow the same process for a marriage. So here's the same man now, William Griffiths, and his spouse or bride, a William Louisa Alexander. So coming back here to MyHeritage, I can search the England and Wales Marriage Index for Griffiths from Monmouthshire in, let's say, 1891. Now this is going to give me a sort of a bad result because I'm not giving it enough information yet. But I wanted to show you a very nice thing that we did in our marriage index is because the way these records work, we can pre-compute in a way who the possible spouses could be for most of the marriages. So when that volume number, the page number, and the district number match, then we have an indication that on that original document, if we could see it, we would find one or maybe just a handful of other persons that could be the marriage. So here at the top you see a Mary Griffiths, and we've computed that there's two possible outcomes that could occur for this marriage record. One is that she's married to this John Jenkins, and another that she could be married to a Richard Williams. So what this lets me do now is I can come back to the website and I can enter in more information about my marriage, such as the surname of my great-grandfather and great-grandmother. So her name was Alexander, and we'll come down here and hit search. And sure enough, here I get the record for William Griffiths with his spouse, Elizabeth Louisa Alexander. They're in Monmouthshire. And if I go into the record here, just to show you what a marriage looks like, we'll zoom in here and I'll be looking for Griffiths. Again, the bride would also occur in these indexes under her surname. So separately, I could find the Alexander section. So I'm looking for William Griffiths, and he's over here. And so this is how I would find, I'm sorry, that's Grimshaw, Griffiths. Let's find Griffiths. William Griffiths in Abergavenny, 11A, volume 87. So another good thing to do to make sure I've got the right person is when we've pre-inferred who the spouse is, I can go to Elizabeth Alexander's record and look up her index entry. So I'm going to look for the surname Alexander with the given names Elizabeth Louisa, and I think in this case she's down here on the left. So Alexander, Elizabeth Louisa, so she's recorded in Abergavenny, page 11, volume 11A, page 87. And so that's the information that I would then use at the passport office to record this actual certificate that I got here. You can say I get information about their ages, when they were married, their condition as to marriages. I see that they were both supposedly their first marriage, he being a bachelor and she being a spinster. Information about their father's names is very helpful. Samuel Griffiths. We don't think, in my case, this is his biological father, more of his adopted father, and other information there. And then here's an example of the same man and his death information. In this case, I've only ordered the PDF file. I don't have the sort of prettier page for this particular record. But here is William Griffiths dying at the age of 79. The informant is his son. It's actually listed there, the relationship, and this is in 1947. And it gives me a wonderful full address of this place where he was living there in column 1, and where the son was living at the time that this death occurred. So in conclusion, remember there's this 2-step process. We search the indexes for the entry that corresponds to our person. We're going to record this information from the index, and then we go to the passport office or this ordering service where we request the actual record. If it's a PDF, we wait a couple days and we'll get access to the PDF file. The PDF files will show up if I come back to my account under main menu. I can view recent orders, and here I put in a range, so I ordered some of these just for this talk earlier this month in September. I'll hit search, and I'll get a couple of records here where I can view the PDFs of those that I've ordered. One thing to note here is they're only going to keep these for 3 months for me, so I need to come back here and download these and save the information before they get sort of expunged from their system. Then we're going to analyze the record, determine what is primary evidence, what is secondary. It's going to help us update our records with this new information we find. And then we're going to formulate new directions for additional research and rinse and repeat, right? So I hope you've enjoyed this sort of little bit of an in-depth analysis or information on these amazing records. I wish these were all immediately available online. Everything that I've read over the last many years about the passport office is they have no intention of changing this program. They seem to probably enjoy the revenue that they're making from this service. So for now, this is what we have. I wish it was more immediate and less sort of costly, I guess to say, to get these records. But for £7 to get, or even £11 for that document, to get this information, it's still incredibly helpful and valuable for the work that we do. And with that, I'm wrapped up. Let's stop and take questions. Again, my name is Mike Mansfield, and here's my email address. If you don't have time today or want to write to me separately, I'm always happy to hear from you there.
Thanks, Mike. I was just going to ask you about that, if you ever anticipate them going online, and then I thought, well, they probably like the money, and but for that cost, yeah, absolutely. To learn about our ancestors, it's not bad at all. Well, very well done. Very good overview. Enjoyed the history, the info about the registration districts, especially those caveats, and thanks for that live demo. Let's head over here. We'll do a couple of door prizes, and then if you have a question, please do put that in the question area of your webinar control panel, everybody. Well, watch this website right here for what's coming. And by the way, this reminds me, I'm going to drag over my other browser from my other monitor. And if you weren't able to attend MyHeritage Live in Amsterdam recently, we're just starting, as of just today, to publish the classes on the FamilyTreeWebinars.com site. So watch here for those classes, and watch also here for any future webinars to register for as part of the MyHeritage Webinars series. Okay, first door prize. If you're here, you're eligible to win. And let's first talk about the 1-year MyHeritage Complete Plan. So this door prize will give you access to the Premium Plus Family Site subscription, and all the goodies are listed here. The data subscription is a separate, unique subscription, but if you join up with the complete plan, then you get access to everything up there, including these GRO indexes that Mike talked about. Thanks, Mike, also for talking about what makes those indexes unique on MyHeritage. Having those potential spouses listed in the way that they are, yeah, that's incredibly helpful. So thanks for letting us know about that. We're going to first go to Tiffany Taylor and say congratulations to Tiffany. You're our winner of the 1-year MyHeritage Complete Plan. Next, we're going to head over to a MyHeritage DNA test kit. And yeah, this is the big thing these days. And by the way, Tiffany is very excited here in the chat area, and you're very welcome, Tiffany. Lots of smiley faces and exclamation points from her. Okay, MyHeritage DNA test kit. Everybody needs one of these, and it's Happy McCork's lucky day because you are the winner of a DNA test kit. So, congratulations to you. Happy. Well, let's go. Let's go right here to my slide about questions and see if we can ask a couple of these of Mike. Hey, so Mike, Joseph writes in saying that he's looking for a death record for his ancestor. His name is William Williams, and but
Oh boy.
he has no idea when he died or the age that he died, and so Joseph's saying if I find six men of the same name, how do I determine which one might be mine? Since little identifying information is offered, does he need to order all of them to find out which one he needs, or are there any other clues or suggestions?
Yeah, so that's a fun challenge. I've got to imagine there's going to be many William Williamses in the index.
Yeah.
Any information you can get about where the family was living or where this individual was residing, if you can narrow it down to, county, a specific county or some counties or registration districts, that would help you tremendously narrow it down. Another important tool would be to use the English and Welsh censuses, like we have on MyHeritage. If this person is living within the time frame when he might be enumerated there, try to find him when he was last living. See what you can find. Anything about his last known residence in a census can help you at least make some theories about where he likely would have been residing upon his death.
Yeah, very good ideas. Thank you. So I've got questions like this: is any of this info applicable to Scotland? And then others ask about Ireland and other countries. Is this pretty specific to England and Wales, or does it apply elsewhere?
Great question, and I kind of pre-assumed that this would come up. So,
Good.
civil registration schemes similar to what I described that started in 1837 in England and Wales were indeed later adopted throughout the other parts of the British realm. So that includes Scotland, all of Ireland, and now it's the Republic of Ireland as well as Northern Ireland. I know for Scotland and Northern Ireland there is a online service. Scotland, you want to go to Scotland's People. And at Scotland's People, you'll find a number of things, one of which I believe are the civil registration records. The Northern Ireland one is called Groni, Groni, so GRO plus Northern Ireland, or GRONI. Both the Scottish service and the Northern Ireland service are a pay per credit type of mode, where you'll be buying a certain number of credits, and then access to a certain type of document will, cost you, say, 5 credits or 10 credits based on what their model is. The good news with Scotland and I think Northern Ireland is you can get almost immediate fulfillment, though you don't have this delay like we see in England and Wales. So yeah, these same civil registration records do exist. I know for certain for Scotland and Northern Ireland. I haven't tried recently to access them for the Republic of Ireland.
Okay. Thanks. Cherry's wondering if registration of the birth was delayed beyond that initial period. Is there any record of the reasons for the delay whenever the registration did occur?
That's a good question. I haven't, in my experience, seen a delayed birth registration.
Yeah. Okay.
So I don't know that I can answer that, but I would suggest that I've seen. So remember, in a lot of these cases, you can go find an analogous or a similar christening or baptism record in the parish records, and it's pretty common to see delayed christenings there. Sometimes you don't necessarily see a reason, but you'll get the ages of these delayed children. something that I've heard, it's maybe, third hand, is, sometimes the parents weren't maybe right with the clergy or the church, and in order to have that first child christened, they had to maybe do some certain things with the clergy to kind of either make amends or whatever that process was. So I've also seen in my experience that it's often the first child that's delayed, and then after that it's at least in the church records.
Okay.
I don't know if that helps.
Good, thanks. So Marilyn has a suggestion on for the Williams problem. She says also check your DNA matches to learn where your ancestor may have lived, so that can help give you another clue. So thanks, Marilyn, for sharing about that.
Absolutely.
And Happy says, what about the Isle of Man? Is that part of the England and Wales collections here?
Good question. I know when I was doing some of the research for this, I did see some reference to Isle of Man.
Okay.
I believe it was that a similar process was included there. I can't speak if they're included in this English and Welsh set or if it's separate.
I was thinking probably go back to you write really good descriptions for the record collections, and so perhaps go onto MyHeritage and learn, see if it talks any more about it there as well. We've got Brian's out there, and he's doing some searching for William Williams, and he's finding 40,768 matches in one in the death collection. So Brian, that's not helping to narrow this down.
Right.
But Brian's having fun out there. Well, good. Mike, we've gone through our comments and questions here. Appreciate all that we've learned here from you today. Before we say goodbye, any final... Oh, Brian says that's for all of the UK. Okay, thanks, Brian. Any final thoughts, Mike, before we sign off?
Just mention that I did quickly search Isle of Man civil registration. It looks like they started in 1878.
Oh, okay.
For births and deaths only, though. So a wonderful article here is the Isle of Man civil registration on the Family Search Research Wiki, which is always a great source if you haven't used it.
Good. Okay. Well, thanks, Mike Mansfield of MyHeritage today for this excellent education. And look forward to learning more from you. And thanks to all of you around the world, wherever and whenever you are, for sharing part of your day with us. And remember that life is short. Do genealogy first. Bye, everyone. Bye, Mike. Thanks.
Goodbye. Thank you. Bye-bye.